ever feel like you're zigzagging your way through leadership? Well, you are in good company. In my conversation today with Nancy Fournier, my longtime coach and nonprofit guru, we swap stories about winding career journeys, the secret powers of standing out, and the wild ride of leadership in the nonprofit world today. You don't want to miss this episode. It's full of wisdom, grit, and reminders that you're different might just be your superpower. Welcome to We've All Done It, the podcast for leaders who get the work done, but find the people part of leading frustrating. I'm Kimberly Benoit, author, award-winning former corporate executive, and leadership coach. With over 20 years in the corporate world, I've seen it all, the good, the bad, and the downright messy. If you've ever avoided a tough conversation, played favorites without realizing it, or just wondered, why is leading people so hard? You're in the right place because we've all done it. This is your space for real talk, real solutions, and no judgment. Together, I'll share practical strategies to help you navigate workplace drama, build stronger teams, and lead with confidence. No more pretending, no more suffering in silence, just honest, actionable leadership from someone who's been in your shoes. Are you ready to lead differently? Let's do this. So welcome back, everybody. I am so excited for today's guest. I've known Miss Nancy Fournier for more years than I care to count at this point. We're approaching a decade?
I think so. It may be even over a decade, actually.
So part of why I love you, and as you heard, for all the coaches out there who's like, I have my own coach, I have been coached. I thought it would be great to bring Miss Nancy in, not just to talk about that, because she was my first coach and she still shows up in the most important ways in my life, but to talk about her amazing self and what she does, particularly for women leadership in nonprofit space. So I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, Nancy, because I feel like I will not do you justice. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I haven't been called Miss Nancy in a while, so I guess I'll start with that. I am, as you said, I am a coach. I work exclusively with women who are in leadership positions with nonprofits. We go back from when we were both living in New Orleans, where I was doing consulting work and interestingly was running a bed and breakfast in the Garden District for a good number of years. But prior to that, I have worked both in nonprofits as an executive director after moving my way up, and also in the public sector for a long time. And all of that work taught me that it comes down to leadership and just really engaged with and enjoy working with other leaders, helping them perfect their skills. And by and large, what I focus on is that really tough stuff of getting along with other people. So I focus on really the relationship aspects of leadership, managing up, down, and across to get what you need done to be effective. And I work with women because I think there's some unique hurdles that I hope we get to talk about of just how you find your voice, how you feel confident, how you keep yourself from second guessing yourself, what it means to be assertive without being aggressive, all those difficult things that, are fine tight ropes that we walk all the time. So, I mean, I could tell I have a doctorate. I guess I should say that. But I'm basically somebody who is pretty enthusiastic about leadership, working on behalf of vulnerable issues, vulnerable people. So that's why I keep centering in the nonprofit space.
Yeah, I've always been a bit just taken back by like how amazing your career is. You've had such just an amazing career journey. And I think you represent what a lot of women go through too, is like you haven't had necessarily the most linear path. And I think that definitely has been true in my career. And I feel like that makes you so good at what you do, is because you can understand, as females, our journeys probably take us in different directions at times that may not necessarily be the same for most men.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there was definitely a lot of zig and zagging, not a straightforward path, kind of did something for, worked. I started out running a runaway shelter, not knowing anything right out of college, overseeing the weekend shift, which, nobody told me that's like prime runaway time. And just bounced a lot, do something for a while, go, I want to try this. Tried academia for a while, tried policy work for a while, started out as a clinician, actually doing counseling with teenagers. So I think the consistent thread is that I am drawn to young people and systems that work with young people, and then kind of got onto the leadership thing from there. But yeah, raised a kid, did that partially as a single parent for a whole lot of years, um, and sort of maneuvered through all of that and had increasingly responsible positions just as my child was hitting adolescence and all the fun stuff with that. Um, Went back and got a doctorate while I was working full time and had that adolescent child. So it has been back and forth. And then through it all, did a 180 and moved to New Orleans 4 months after Hurricane Katrina and bought a floundering bed and breakfast in the Garden District and did that for a decade. So yeah, I don't know if it says something about my attention span or the fact that I think you can learn a lot from all different pieces of life. And really, my experience running a small business with my husband probably taught me more than I use in my work in coaching work now than any of my fancy classes or years as a nonprofit ED.
Yeah, that's I would think that's probably, especially being a bed and breakfast in New Orleans, being adaptable, expect the unexpected. I know that ownership is
Maintain a smile on your face when you're just like ready to go, oh my God, yeah.
get out, leave.
Or what were you thinking? Or is that how you behave at home? Or yeah. No,
The
that
answer
was
probably to that question is
gratifying.
yes.
Yeah, I know, really. It's a gratifying experience, though. It's really one of the things, when I think of the things that I'm proud of, being part of helping stand the city back up through that business, and really taking it from something that was absolutely floundering to really successful and all the stuff you got to learn to do that. I still pull from those lessons a lot. And to tie it back to leadership, 90% of it was perseverance, because that was about 4 really scary years where it just didn't seem like the city would ever turn. And, there is nobody was coming to visit. And the people who were coming to visit were parents who were coming to make sure that their kid who had come down and muck out houses had like a hot shower. And so they'd stayed for 2 days, but that was it. We were a FEMA hotel when I bought the bed and breakfast. So,
Oh wow,
yeah,
that I didn't know.
it was full of New Orleanians who were placed there, and we were very lucky. We had just really wonderful people, but there was also a certain point where we said, guys, you're going to have to leave. We've got to make this a business. Oh yeah. I walked in and there was a dorm fridge in the dining room that they were using for their food, and all their belongings were in big, hefty plastic bags in their rooms. I mean, everything they owned. It was wild. It was very, very strange. So anyway, what it takes to grit through that. And, I was tutoring for $12 an hour to try to make ends meet. It was scary. And when you realize there's like nobody coming to save you but yourself, and you just gotta hunker down and do everything you got to do to make it work. You and I both experienced this as solo entrepreneurs, when there are weeks and weeks where your phone's not ringing and just got to keep rowing. I learned that from running the bed and breakfast.
Is this episode hitting a nerve? Are you facing complex people challenges and have tried leadership books, workshops, and the advice from everyone, and somehow it's still not working? Now imagine having a trusted leadership partner who understands your specific challenges and strengths. My one-on-one leadership program provides the support you need with a customized plan. If you'd like to learn more, click on the link in the show notes and book some time with me. I'll explain how it works. Now back to the show. So it's an interesting segue from that into, you said something about having to start with like the city kind of was broken, and it was that perseverance and trying to get to something that's successful. So when you think about your career and the fact that you've chosen to work a lot with primarily with female leaders
Mhm.
who are doing more public servant-ish kind of work. You know,
Right.
nonprofits tend to be more geared toward that area. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it? So, what do you see most common when you're working with leaders, particularly female leaders? And I mean, it could apply overall. But
Sure.
what do you see as the areas that people struggle the most when they're coming to you for coaching support? And
I love that question. The things that I hear all my clients struggle with, and there's a commonality. The first piece, I wouldn't say for them, they're going to identify it as the primary issue, but one that I continually am struck with is how fundamentally lonely and isolating it is to run an organization. And that's partially because you cannot share everything with your staff. There is a sort of protective element, especially in these times. I mean, we're having this conversation in March of 2025, and I do not have a client that is not in various stages of full blown panic over either their funding or a lot of their mission. I have a number of clients for whom all the issues around what we just shorthand call DEI, all around equity issues is under assault. So they're all on various stages of panic. Their funding is unclear. Their federal agencies have been shuttered. There's just a lot of scary things going on at this point in time. And they can't share all of that with their staff. They're realistic, but they can't share that. Their boards don't really understand their jobs. So there's an element of isolation there. And they may have robust partnerships, but those partnerships are also competitors. So there's only so much they can share then. So they're fundamentally holding this stuff on their own, while most of my clients, and they're all different ages, also carry the primary responsibility of the other part of their lives. So they're either raising kids or they're taking care of parents who are aging or in-laws who are aging or great aunts that are aging. So they're engaged in that family keeping too. So they're just, it's such a trite stereotype, but it's still true. The candle's being burned on both ends, and they don't really have a place to unleash it all, or a safe place to go. I don't know what to do, or I'm exhausted. So I think that loneliness and isolation is one thing that I hear. And I think the other, not I think, I am confident, the other thing I hear all the time is not knowing what to do with their wealth of expertise. Like they have it. It may be content expertise, it may be management expertise, it may be financial or fundraising or combination of all of that. But there is this like inherent sense to soft pedal it so that they're not seen as overly aggressive or that they're, they just have this initial sense that their confidence is questioned. And so they rewrite what they're going to say before they say it, or they'll come to me and go, I'm having trouble because I'm seen as too opinionated or too controlling. And so figuring out how to take what they know and get it out in a way that feels palatable and is received as palatable. I think those are the two major things that they feel or that they struggle with. Probably the third thing is to get comfortable in holding their employees accountable to a certain level of performance. They just really struggle with that, which in my mind goes back to the same issue of how do you assert yourself in a way that feels palatable and is respected. And all of those three things kind of lead to them kind of questioning their own confidence and their own ability. I do not like the term imposter syndrome. It reminds me of back in the day when women used to wear padded shoulders in their suits. It just assumes that we're trying to be like something else. And to me, what I try to do with the clients that I work with is help them find who they are, their unique themness. What it means to be a woman leader is as different as there are women leaders, and just acknowledge their weak points, work on them, but really embrace all their own brilliance that got them there in the first place. And that's really hard for a lot of my clients to do. They are just continually second guessing themselves. They can get 15 accolades, great job, one small criticism. And that's the thing that just goes in their head again and again, like the tape that doesn't stop. So
I think that first, fascinating, because I was making notes. So the idea of loneliness and isolation, that it seems to be pervasive. So not just even in nonprofits. I feel what you're saying. I hear that with so many other leaders, even in corporate spaces, particularly women, the component of they have to show up and be a boss at work, and they're also the boss of their home. And we're in this interesting place where we're moving away from like accommodation, where, because I'm hearing this more and more of where you need to be in the office every day, you need to be there all day, versus kind of, we had almost moved into a place of as long as the work was getting done, the productivity was there, you could flex to be the parent you needed to be or the family member that you needed to be. So that's interesting there.
They carry a lot of stuff, I mean, they're carrying the family calendar, they're carrying
that emotional weight,
all of that weight. And what strikes me is when I ask them, what are you thinking about when you're driving home or your commute home, whatever that looks like, if you're on the L or the bus or you're driving or whatever. And they're thinking about work, but then they also say they try to give themselves this like 10-minute switch so that they can put on their not work hat on. But they're not done processing their work stuff. So they just have this like accumulation of stuff in their head that they're thinking about in the shower, as they're making dinner, as they're running around picking up all the various people that need to be picked up and taken somewhere else, that they never kind of get to do a full data dump in their head or an emotional dump of all of what's going on. Because what I hear a lot is, and, my partner doesn't want to hear me talk about work all the time. My friends don't really understand what I do. So it just kind of boils inside.
What are your top things that you recommend to your clients? What are some things that you've seen work?
In terms of the loneliness part, or what?
For this component, for this element of it. Because that sounds, almost every woman I know that's in my age range, what we're talking about is their daily reality.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is an interesting opportunity just to talk about what are some things that you have seen work, or at least get people on a path.
Okay.
That
I
isn't,
get your question now. Yeah.
you know what I mean? That at least starts them on a path of trying something other than status quo, because obviously that's not going to get them anywhere.
That doesn't work. And again, not in order of importance, but one of the things that does seem to be recurring, what I suggest, is we make some assumptions about what the non-work people in our lives want to hear or know about us. And so often we make an assumption that the partner or the child or the friend isn't interested in their work. So they cut themselves off. And I do ask them to kind of revisit that and explore that boundary a little bit. Often we create our own boundaries. We create our own, they don't want to know about that. And those that care about you do care about you. And they care about what you care about only because they care about it. I mean, how many times have you sat and listened to a friend talk about something technical, whether it's their hobby or their job, and you really don't care, but you care about them. So you listen and you ask appropriate questions. And those questions and support have more to do with your relationship than the content
Mm.
of the conversation. So the first thing that I encourage these folks to do is to re-examine some of those self-imposed, I can't share that with. Now, some of that is in their personal life, but because I work with them in their work life, a lot of where we start with is exploring their relationship with their board and their board chair. Because some of this is, well, I can't explain this to them, or I can't tell them that, or they're not going to want to know that, or they don't know enough about this to understand, blah, blah, blah. You can imagine.
Yeah.
And really encourage them to revisit that they may be part of what's pushing, which they may be part of the problem with creating that isolation. So that's the first thing is boundaries, and looking to expand them in some ways. But conversely, I also taught to them about creating better boundaries, about not taking on some things that are not theirs. And that often has to do with helping them exercise. I rarely say it this way
Mhm.
because, if someone said that to me, my shoulders would immediately go up and I'd be thinking of all the ways in which you don't understand what I'm saying to you rather than really listening to you.
Yeah.
So that often comes down to helping them look at their delegation muscles
Yeah.
and what they're holding on to and what they maybe need to let go, and helping them begin to really embrace the idea that when you delegate, you're really building your leadership pipeline. When you delegate, you're really keeping people on your staff and feeling like they can grow. So that's kind of two things. Expanding your boundaries and erecting better boundaries are both of those things. And I'm a huge believer in finding a mentor or a colleague that you really respect and taking the risk to call them up. You're really good at this. You're like a networker par excellence, far better than me.
Thank
But
you.
to absolutely invite them for a cup of coffee in the morning to begin to build your own support group
Yeah.
that is based on what you have in common, or the thing about that person that you really admire. And it's hard. We're all busy, but it's sort of making a challenge of trying to reach out to someone that feels like support every couple of weeks. Those
I
are the
can't sit here and applaud the notion of challenging the narrative you have in your head as true. You called them boundaries of who wants to hear me talk, or who wants to hear what I have to say, or can what I can or can't do. It's amazing how we as humans will create stories that seem very real for ourselves
Sure.
to fit the reality that's happening versus challenging ourselves a little bit and saying, but is that really true?
Yeah.
Where's the evidence that my spouse doesn't want to know? And
Right.
even if he said once, hey, I can't do this today, maybe he just was having a bad day. That didn't mean he didn't want to hear about it forever.
Right.
But I love that that's a place to start, is to challenge narrative of what is or what isn't possible.
Well, and we have these tapes, or filters or lenses or whatever you want to call it, that you're right. It just skews our whole perception. And, maybe it's right, but sometimes that skewed perception creates the reality that it didn't have to be that way. And I think for very mission driven women leaders, they have a hard time remembering that the other person doesn't have to care as much as they do about the content. It's
Yeah.
not about that. They're doing that because they care about you.
You.
And, when they realize how often they do that with people in their lives, it's sort of like a no brainer. But you're right. We create these scenarios and tapes and, I don't know, ways of seeing it, which is why I believe coaching can be so valuable. Just to have an outside, no dog in the fight person to go, let me tell you about this pattern I'm seeing that you can't see when you're in the middle of living it.
And I can attest that I've heard those words.
Yes.
And And the power of those words is tremendous because you don't know it's a story until someone calls it out. And going back to even your suggestion of finding a mentor, so someone who does something well that you're trying to emulate, if you create that safe space, whether it's a mentor, a coach, but allowing someone in to be
Mhm.
able to even identify maybe where you have gaps or areas that you're not even aware that you're creating for yourself. Because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Well, if no one's there, like the narrative will feed itself and then you will make it reality
Mhm.
based on that. I just feel like and I say this we collectively because I've been your coachee and I know like what it meant to be there to have someone to challenge my thought, to challenge and because it's not comfortable. It never
Yeah.
is. And this is why I think it's great that I love that I'm coaching now because I can sit here and say, "Oh no, I know what it's like to have somebody call you out on something." And then you say, "Well, wait, the defensiveness that comes with it of like, well,
Yeah.
wait. And then you have to go sit with it for a second and think, oh crap,
Yeah.
maybe Nancy was right. And so,
I hope it wasn't calling you out. That sounds so
no, but
like
it's not, no, but I mean, like, but think about it from the other side,
from
right?
the
Like
other
you're
side. Yeah.
coming from a very like comforting, nurturing place. But when you are challenged on an aspect of your behavior that is comfortable but not healthy, let's frame it that way. The natural inclination is what you said, is where people may backpedal and say, "But you don't understand," but the buts come in. And that's
Mhm.
essentially just becoming defensive at a certain way in some level. But that's usually an indicator. Now I've come to understand when I find myself getting defensive, it's usually because I need to really dig deeper into
What that
what it
is.
is,
Yeah.
because that's probably not something that's serving me really well, and someone else is doing me a favor. But it took me a while to get to that point where I could see when someone was saying, "Hey, do you realize this about yourself?" That was actually coming from a good place. So you have to have it almost has to come from both ways, though. You have to have the person who's willing to give you that,
Yeah.
and then also be willing to receive
Yeah.
something that may not be information that's gonna validate what you already believe to be true.
Yes, I think that's true. And you said a pattern that is not healthy, and I often find it's a pattern that's totally unrecognized.
Mhm.
That that not even aware of it. And I like to think when I'm really on my game, I'm I've picked up how the person learns and takes in information, which will affect how I sort of say, let me tell you what my mirror to you is seeing.
Yeah.
And
No, you're actually very gentle in your ways to of, like,
I
challenge.
try. I worry I'm not always because I also am a believer that a good coach is not in your life forever. I
Yeah.
really do believe that. You know, I, I sort of envy, but don't agree with those folks who, somehow keep their clients for 2, 3 years. I don't think the whole process is that you see me in the rearview mirror and feel good about it. So I'm often balancing, God, I want to get this out and dealt with quickly so that we're making the best use of the time with,
Yeah.
I got to also go gentle because this is sort of how they've protected themselves for a while. So
It's that interesting place of meeting people where they are,
yeah, yeah,
but also knowing how to nudge them and help them because 'cause they're not coming to you to stay where they are. They're coming to you because they know there's something not working, and they clearly can't figure it out themselves.
well, they
Um,
often think it's somebody else's fault though. It's sort of I need to either get rid of this staff person or help me figure out how to get all new board people. And it's sort of like, you're probably going to be taking these issues with you. So
well, it's so I mean, I find this funny because when I was writing the book, that was something that came up a lot is whenever I find that people, when they're telling stories about toxic environments or drama-filled environments or something that's just not working in a team environment, they either see themselves as all hero or all victim. They're
Yeah.
not really good at seeing that you're kind of probably in between. You're playing a part in it, in the festering of it. And until you can really understand and embrace that in some way of like, what is your role really?
Mhm.
And even in what we're talking about now, some of your role is the narrative that you have. It's
Right.
the and it because that's dictating how you're interacting, it's dictating how you're navigating everything about your life. So if that boundary, if those structures are not clear, then how you move through your world is going to remain murky.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. And I do try to model with them about how do you learn to read people that you can be more effective in your relationships with them. And it plays out both managing up and down. It's sort of, if I say to them, well, how does your board members or your executive committee, how do they learn? And I get this silence. Like, what do you mean? How do they learn? I send them my report, and it's like, well, is that how they learn? Do you know how they take in information?
Yeah.
I don't know how you lead if you don't know how the people you're leading understand and make use of information. Like, you've got to get better at knowing that. Do people, are the auditory? Do you need to shadow? Do you need to model? Do they read? What do they do? Do they need to ask questions? And if you don't know that, you're handicapping yourself. And then to your point, it's easy to turn this into villain hero, these sort of, two-way binary choices.
All
And
good,
like
all
this,
bad.
yeah. And like this very gray, it's not black, white. It's a lot of gray. And so I guess that's the other thing, is helping increase their emotional intelligence. So they figure out what's the win-win. What's the win-win for me and my staff? What's the win-win for me and my board? What's the win-win, and they are not always focused on that.
Well, in all fairness, I feel like society wise, that's not what's being reinforced at us. I feel, so much of how our world exists is it is very, I feel things are very binary, in so many ways. And so it's not surprising that people that we've moved into this territory of creating these narratives of like, well, I'm right.
Yeah.
And that means you have to be wrong.
Right.
And that not that their compromise isn't as valued as I think it used to be. Which is where I think work like what we do is really important, because it's not about being right or wrong. It's around how do you move forward? And,
Mhm.
what is the goal? Is the
Right.
goal just being right? I don't think that's why you're here. The goal, you came because your goal is I need to make my team, my nonprofit, you're trying to figure out how to be successful. So that you got to remember what the goal is, and to get to that might mean some compromise or
Well, and
it
you
seems
can
a
be
little
right as
differently.
day. And if nobody's following you, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. You'll be a team
That's
of one.
exactly. And I say that a lot with my clients. You want your folks to follow you over the hill.
Yeah.
And you've got work to do for them. I mean, they got to understand the hill, but they've also got to trust that you're there with them. That you understand that there's an incentive to move them there. It's interesting what you said about us being forced into this black white thing. But again, I go back to think of your most valuable relationships and how much gray is in
Mhm.
that relationship, you know, um, and what you are willing to put up with that annoys you because of the payoff.
Yeah.
You're trying to replicate those really positive relationships where there's give and take, where
Yeah.
there is a ton of gray. Um, in your work relationships.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I almost wish, I mean, it sounds bizarre since we just are disbanding the Department of Education, but
Yeah.
part of what I feel has gotten missed, and I do think this applies particularly because of pandemic years and the reliance on texting versus even this kind of communication, is the ability to understand that things are not always black and white. Like, I always go back and I think about how many times text messages get misunderstood
Oh, yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're just words. There's no tone, there's no inflection. I mean, this
Well,
happened to me
even
this morning.
emails, even emails, how easy is it to misread? You're putting
Misinterpret.
right.
I've
Yeah.
got great intentions. Or it could be the other way around. Someone emailed me with the best of intentions. I'm not in a good mood. And how I read that sentence in my mind
Right.
is not how you type the sentence in yours. So, but I feel like there's so much that has gotten lost. And I do think the pace of our world is so fast that we're not slowing down enough to actually even consider that how I interpreted that maybe wasn't what was intended.
Mhm.
Um, it's just very interesting because I'm thinking back now into the COVID days, back in my last organization, we had leaders communicating major messages via text message because it was the quickest, fastest way to get to the team. But no one would tell you anywhere in any leadership training, any leadership coaching or guidance that communicating key major policy shifts via text message is not the route to go. But we have a whole generation and a whole group of people who think texting solves it. So I think our communication vehicles also can feed some chaos.
I think that's true, but yes, and this mindset of we're so busy, we're so busy, we're so busy. I need to find the fastest way to communicate, which is I'm not going to say always, but is rarely the best, short of house on fire. Um, not
Yeah.
and for those of you just listening, I'm fingering texting as I'm saying that. Part of when you said, well, what do you suggest around the loneliness and the isolation is kind of old school, but yeah, take that time to actually sit down and meet for breakfast or go for a walk with your board chair. Like if you don't know them as a person, if they don't know you as a person, like why you took this job, why they want to be on the board, what the issue of what you do means to them, there's a limit of how effective that relationship's going to be.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting takes time. And I always hear, I don't have the time. Well, yeah, but it's the same amount of time spent digging out of miscommunication, being frustrated. If there's anything, when you say, what's the other problem is I have a disengaged board that doesn't do anything. It's like herding cats. It's a waste of my time, blah, 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 blah. Investing time in that relationship. And that stuff does take time. And it's, what do you value? What's your ROI on that? To use more corporate terms. And they're pretty big. And you're not going to get that by just texting your board chair. Did you get my email? That's not a robust relationship.
Well, and the same goes to teams you lead. To have an engaged team
Yeah.
requires commitment of
Yep.
time, of energy, focus. One of the things that I feel I've been beating a drum on for the last couple of years is when you meet with people, you have to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be answering emails, texting. If you have a problem with a notification on that Apple Watch that you have on your arm, that if you have Pavlov dogged it, where you cannot help but look at your watch in a 15-20 minute one-on-one, then you need to take the watch off. Because again, it goes back to what you're talking about. Any relationship you're interested in cultivating, whether it's your board chair, your board chair, your boss, a mentor, your
Exactly.
team, your children, your spouse, like the focus or presence has to be there. And that doesn't happen fast. That's, to your point, it's a slow investment. That can pay tremendous dividends, but you've got to put the time and the effort in. You've got to make the space for it.
Which always then goes to the next thing that I don't think there's a client. I haven't spent time talking about this, which is managing your time. We talked about the Apple Watch. The first thing I tell my folks, because they don't have time, is that they got to turn off their email notifications. I don't care how it is. Some people have it that it pops up on their screen. Some weirdly have it on their phone. It's like you need to not have your email, your life. So
Yeah.
we talk about creating some discipline with that you have time during the day where you consciously check in on your email and then not the rest of it. And then you create some order about what you need to get back to and what you don't, but it becomes this Pavlovian, dog response. And I read this really scary thing and I can't remember the exact point, but it is some absurd amount of hours in a working person, the number of hours that they spend at emails. It's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
over half of their working time. And it's a time suck. And when we start talking about how do you create office hours so you're available to your staff, not necessarily the built in stone supervisory meetings, but that you're available. And on the other side, how do you give the message that you're not available,
Yeah.
that you can't just kind of pop in? And all of that has to do with how you manage your time, how you manage your calendar. And I so agree with you. Those Pavlovian email dings, is
Oh, nothing would make me angrier than I finally have your time, because getting on people's calendars can be incredibly hard. And it's because obviously I have something important to talk to you about, and I'm barely into my first sentence, and you're staring at your watch or you're immediately texting on your phone. And I got to the point where I would just stop talking and
should I
I'd wait
tell
to
you
see
that I
how
had a
long
client?
they would realize I wasn't saying anything.
Yeah. And they
And then
look up.
eventually they would say, "Oh, you can keep going. I'm listening." And I'll say, "No, no, I'll wait for you."
I had
And
a
it
client
wasn't
that
mean about it, but I would
yeah,
say,
yeah,
"I'll wait for you because this is
yep.
clearly important. That's fine. Like, take care of that. That's important." And because there's ways you can do it that's professional and respectful, but at the same time, like, you have to think, if it bothers you, if someone doesn't give you their full attention, then
Mhm.
why would you ever do it to someone else? And so just because you're higher up on the food chain doesn't excuse it. It actually almost makes it worse.
Yeah.
Um, because those people depend on having your time. So,
Well, it always reminds me of being at a party and you're talking to someone, but you're continually scanning the room. Like, is there someone more interesting I could be talking to? I think that's the message it gives to people.
yeah, you're not that important,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
Or, yeah, I think that's what it ends up with. So, and that is not gender specific.
No.
I do want to say one other thing to your question from way back about what's common. Because I think it's worth saying and pointing out to the people that are listening to you, even though it's 2025, even though there's been huge progress in terms of pay differential and representation and all that stuff, there's still some pretty hardcore gender stereotypes that exist in America right now about what women leadership is. And
Yeah.
we can talk about the past presidential campaign. We can talk about how the different standards that actresses are given to. I mean, there's tons of examples. I do not believe that's a binary issue. It does not mean that issues that men face as leaders are less important. I just went to this amazing lecture by this guy named Richard Reeves about all the things that are happening to men in this country over the last 20 years. The statistics were staggering about suicide rates, and non-college educated men's wages are basically flat since 72. I mean, staggering things.
Yeah.
It's not either or. It's not, there's issues here, which means those other issues are not important. It's like, blue lives versus black lives matter. It's not an either or thing at all. But being a woman running an organization today brings with it inherent challenges by virtue of being a woman. And we don't say that aloud very often because we're sort of assuming that we've moved past it. And we haven't. There are just some hard built-in gender roles, gender stereotypes, and assumptions that make it that much more challenging. And we're not even talking about people who are part of the LGBTQI group, just, flat out. And it's
Yeah.
still around. And I find there's a certain hesitancy to talk about it on the part of my clients because we're all thinking, oh, we should surely be past this by now. But we're not. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
um, both sides. Both are important, but there are some real clear additional hurdles to overcome.
Yeah, I appreciate the call out of regardless of who you are, I feel like every grouping has unique challenges
Yep, for
from
sure.
each other. That doesn't diminish the fact that everybody has challenges, but it's figuring out, understanding that there are regardless of category. So no, I agree with that completely. So being mindful of time, I do want to ask you one last question. Because I think this is always interesting. And I've changed kind of how I ask this question because I think it's kind of fun to have people reflect a little bit. But through your lived experience, because you've had a very wild and just an interesting ride thus far that has really informed so much of your work and how you share and give to the rest of us. What do you wish you had known earlier in your career when you think about leadership? So, of all the things that you had, what is that one nugget you wish you had learned or understood earlier in your career?
Wow. That's a really good question. Do I wish I would have understood? So, you know, the honest answer is there's nothing wrong with being different. Full stop. Um, I think it was that. I was such an anomaly, and it was hard to lead and be aware of being the only woman. I started out in the public safety juvenile justice world, so I was around a ton of sheriffs. I was little darling for a lot of people for a lot of years, or sweetheart, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, I was a northerner, and I was doing this in southern places. Yankee. I could just put that out there. Um, and I have a fancy vocabulary. I just am that way. I've always been that way. And so I was really different. And I was so uncomfortable with being different that I tripped over myself for so long. I just thought there was one way you were supposed to be, or I didn't have models of other ways to be. And it took me a long time to be confident in leading because I felt so different. And I wish I didn't have that. That would probably be it.
That's awesome.
Well, it's awesome now. It wasn't awesome then, but
No, but I think I think that's wonderful insight for other people who maybe if you're listening and you feel like you are supposed to be something else or you're supposed to fit in a certain way or you have to change something to be where you are, that it's okay to be different. You're bringing something to the table that
yeah,
nobody else has. So how do you take that difference and say this is, for lack of sounding super cliche and corny, but what in that is a superpower? What in that becomes a strength for you because you aren't like everybody else?
I did not see it as a strength. I saw it as something that was going to hold me back. We started our conversation before you turned on the recorder talking about our hair. So you have straight hair and I have really curly hair. And for all those years, having really curly hair, like nobody looked like me, nobody
Yeah.
anywhere. And that can, and I don't mean just all the superficial stuff.
Yeah.
It was also the decisive stuff. It was also the analytical stuff. It was all that stuff just felt different from everybody else around me. And it just took me forever to lean into that. And it still applies, I guess. So,
Well,
yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much. One, thank you for coming on the show, sharing all your wisdom. I want to say thank you for being brave enough to be my first coach ever and still liking me enough to hang around with life and pick up the phone whenever I'm like, Nancy, I have this crazy thing.
And I say, no, don't do that.
No, my favorite is, okay, I think you need to hear this. And then you say things and it's so funny because I listen every single time. And I pay very close attention to my reaction to whatever you have to say, because I
Oh,
know whatever that reaction is, I need to go sit and think for a while. And so I'm immensely grateful
you're
that our
very
paths
kind.
have crossed, and I'm immensely grateful that you're still in my universe. So thank you so much for joining me today.
We'll right back at you.
I've got two things before I let you go. One, if you've ever gotten any value from the show, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps and absolutely makes my day. The second thing is, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with me, please shoot me an email at podcast@KimberlyJBenoit.com. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next episode.